Well, welcome to CTV. I'm Mark Zapotowski, also known as Mark Dickerson. With me tonight we have the mighty Blue, alias Mark Hammond, over this way, that way, that's Mark Hammond. And then we have mighty Pablo Bayo,
Tiempo Latino.
one of our newer members.
Tiempo Latino.
And we have the illustrious Bobby Gilbert right over here. There's Bobby Gilbert. There's the illustrious Pablo Bayo. And there's the mighty Blue in that direction.
I can barely see. Yeah.
Also, yes. What happened?
Oh, we lost the TV
We lost
show.
the feed.
It's back. It's back.
We are back. And tonight, CTV, a 22 year or 22 and a half year issues retrospective. What was that flash? What did that mean? I don't know.
Special effects, Mark.
Or the aliens, and we'll get into that tonight.
They could be here.
Communicating.
They're telling us they're here.
Signals.
Well, you know, CTV, how the world has changed since we began, and in what ways has it remained the same? What surprised us? What didn't surprise us? For me, I'm the person here on the panel at this moment who was here from the very beginning. Not that there aren't others, but when we started, we were hoping to save the United States from what looked like an inevitable decline and disaster economically that was taking place, where the middle class was getting totally hollowed out and things were really going to
Tax cut for the billionaires, Mark.
SOS, I guess, and not that was LOL or anything else, but whatever it wasn't good, and all that ended up happening, and more than that ended up happening. What we hoped wouldn't happen is that the unions wouldn't die, and that manufacturing would be retained in the United States, and people would wake up before it was too late. And guess what? They didn't wake up, and it got way too late, and that part of the economy is over. And tonight we have a person who actually studied economics in the last 5 or 6 years. One of our own members, who's been a member for a long time, Bobby Gilbert. And what they taught her was that it was all inevitable because of automation. And to me, and to the people I started this group with way back 22 years ago, what seemed to be going on was that people wanted to save money by plugging into lower cost labor markets. Maybe the truth lies between those two things, but one thing is for sure, the United States has largely been denuded of its manufacturing economy, and I say, we'll see what Bobby has to say about that. I say that had to do with the removal of the tariffs. Once you removed the tariffs, there were no penalties for Americans investing in very cheap labor markets, and they could import you willy-nilly without a care into the United States from these low-cost labor markets, and that's essentially what caused the U.S. to have a 1% to 2% growth rate in its economy for 20 years or more or whatever. And we'll hear what Bobby has to say about it. What do you think at this point, after all this time?
Well, part of it is exactly what you said, when you remove tariffs. But, there's tariffs on certain things. I mean, there's, even when it comes to certain parts of the cow, a whole cow has a certain kind of tariff on it, and ground beef has a certain tariff on it. Frozen beef has a different tariff on it.
Well,
prepared. So anyway,
are you saying that it didn't apply to agriculture as much as it applied to manufactured goods?
It does. It does as well. And so what I was going to get at is, so when there's a certain tariff on, like, let's say the whole cow cost is a bigger tariff or whatever. So then they'll just start processing it overseas, and then there becomes another thing. So let's say. And one thing I read today.
Would they actually ship our cows to be dismantled in other places?
Oh yes.
Oh my God.
Trucks have a really high. It's called the chicken tax. Trucks have a really high tariff rate.
So they could take our livestock, dismantle them in Mexico, where labor costs are far cheaper.
Correct.
Than just re-import them.
Correct.
In relatively short period of time.
Correct. My aunt works for this company that they take lumber from the U.S. And ship it to Canada to be treated and processed, and it comes back to her factory, and then they make it into whatever little wood products that they make there. But the lumber comes from the U.S., goes over to China to be cut and treated, and then it comes back to her factory, and then they manufacture it to China. Sorry.
China,
yeah.
not Canada.
Right. Sorry.
But like the cars, they make cars in Mexico.
But so there's this thing called the chicken tax, and so Europe was really pissed off at the United States about chickens, and so they made this really big. They didn't like that we were feeding our chickens hormones. I don't know if you ever heard of this. It's like from the 70s or 80s. So and anyhow, so that since they were charging us this high tax on chickens to send them over to Europe, they decided that so we countered that. Well, you can't make trucks, so that's why all trucks, even Toyotas and Honda trucks, are made in the U.S. because there's such a high tariff and tax. So the summary is that they'll get around it any way they want. Like even tennis shoes, you'll buy a pair of tennis shoes that have felt on the bottom. They consider those slippers, and then there isn't the same kind of taxes there on tennis shoes. So you'll have they'll make the shoes overseas, but they'll put felt on the bottom, and then they're considered slippers, and so it's a different tax. So really, everything's about wording now, and you can that's where they're changing the taxes and tariffs. So even if you do charge these tariffs, they're working their way around them. Is what I'm getting at.
All this is really benefiting the wealthy manufacturers, investors,
the millionaires.
not the workers per se. If the workers are working in an industry that isn't suffering from tariffs, then they're just lucky. But,
right.
But you don't dispute that the trend is that we lose our industries and our productive capabilities, and the market itself is being exploited.
Oh, absolutely. We're losing it, yeah.
I think the market's being exploited to a kind of break-even point, sort of where, all the way to the point where the market's not worth exploiting anymore, and then its labor market will be exploited. So we'll reach a sort of inversion point, and perhaps at some point in 10, 20, 30, or 40 years, China will have overall higher labor costs, perhaps, than the United States. At that point, we'll see the reverse going on, but it's not what anyone was envisioning 22 years ago. They were telling people at CTV that we were crazy and we should go back to Russia and participate in its collapse or something.
Marco,
What would you say?
like to add the, like in Mexico, like Ford, for example, they got factories in Mexico, in the north of Mexico, like Sonora, Hermosillo, these maquiladoras in Mexico, and they make cars, and they pay like less than $4 to the employees per hour, or less than that, maybe $2 or less than $2 per hour. And a worker here gets paid like $15, $20 per hour. Before.
Yeah, but when we started the show, they were making like $27 or $29 per hour. So
you are paying like practically pennies in Mexico, and they bring the product here and they sell it like
but that's not
the profit is like a lot of money, for Ford, for example.
Sure, it's a lot of profit for them. But it's not to
in the meantime, like in Detroit, there is no jobs.
Right.
There are no jobs.
It's very true. The auto manufacturing in Michigan has declined fantastically. It used to employ millions of people. Now it employs maybe a couple 100,000 people, and so the decline is fantastic. And this has not been to the benefit of the United States. It may have been in the short-term benefit of some people in other parts of the world, including Mexico, But that's not the way it should have happened, is what I say. It should not, I don't think it should ever be that way. That I really do believe in economic isolationism. I think that in order to protect the nation, we needed to protect its insular economy, and other economies should have developed on a parallel basis. It shouldn't have been about the big capitalists manipulating everyone and making the United States decline. It's not the way it should have happened. It's the way it did happen, and it's the way what's going on with our, are we going in and out like that on the cable? I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lightning flash. Well, let me ask you.
Okay, Blue.
Azul.
You know, it wasn't that long ago we had 13 colonies, right?
Well,
The rest
250 years ago.
1700.
1700s, and then we kept the manifest destiny march westward, right, until we took over part of Mexico through wars and accumulation.
And now they
Yes,
say
well-
that we are illegals.
And my point is
Let's let
that
him
people are moving all the time through barriers that once were. And when I've traveled 40 countries now, and every single one of those people in those countries is a human being. See, now, I know that people like in America, I was at my sister-in-law's Christmas party, or Thanksgiving, and she says Americans will never stand for lowering the standard of living.
Well, it already
We'll
has,
just
but
work
anyway.
harder, and she has this sort of, and she said, Trump is good for the economy because he's going to start a war, and that'll give a lot of people a lot of jobs.
She's crazy.
I know she's crazy, but you got to imagine that there are a lot of crazy people in this world. Not
Ignorant people.
and I just
They're not
encourage
crazy,
you.
they're
I
ignorant.
encourage you to look past nationalism, because I think eventually the barriers are going to come down amongst all the people of the world, and we're all going to be in the same soup together. I'm not saying there won't be exploitive
La
people
sopita.
and people that are exploited, but it wasn't that long ago we weren't even Americans. We were Europeans, or we were Africans, or whatever it was that we progressed.
Aztecs.
And our identity is the only thing that we have holding us back from sharing the world with everybody else, because we think somehow America should be elevated.
Well, let's take a perspective on democracy and whether or not democracy is, I mean, if that's a good ideal, if that's something to be striven for, then having a world stage for the economy and for politics, I would say is not the proper stage for democracy. When we've seen things on that scale, people lose their democracy. When the Romans developed to the point where they'd conquered so much that they ended up with an emperor who was manipulating their local politics to say, I'm the one, they lost whatever element of democracy they had.
Well, that
and
was- That was back
they
when
applauded
city-states
The
ruled
masses
back
applauded
then.
it.
You know, most Romans, most Italians never became Italian until, what, 50 years ago? Wasn't it in the
Well,
40s?
150
60 years ago,
maybe.
they made Italy. Italy was a bunch of provinces before that all had their identities, and then they became identified as Italy. So it's just working our way into a bigger vision of what humanity is, so that we don't get stuck in that I'm a Lucerian
Well,
and you're a guy from
Well,
Basel.
I will tell you what happened, Mike.
Just let me,
let me tell you
let's
what
have
happened.
you go first.
United States spends billions and billions of dollars in wars. That's what's happening.
That has happened.
That's
yes.
where the money goes. There is money for schools. There is money to create more jobs, to fix the highways, to fix the infrastructure. What do? They spend the money goes to Afghanistan and Iraq. Billions and billions. They were spending $30 billion every week in Iraq. Imagine how much they are spending in Afghanistan right now. And they keep spending all this money in Iraq and Afghanistan. Just two countries wasting all this money, creating more hate, and this is what's happening. Don't don't believe those lies that the Republicans. Oh, we're saving the world. That's not true. They are just wasting all this money that can be used for to help people in this country.
Well, like your sister-in-law was saying, back in World War II, that's what they used to boost the economy was the war effort
Yeah.
and whatnot. But now we don't have as many soldiers or as many people fighting. It's a much smaller war, and it's more roboticized and more intellectual of a war rather than all the people. And so, making, hundreds of thousands of uniforms. We're not over here working to make war items. Nobody's doing that anymore. We're making items for our own consumerism. So I don't know where people get the idea that a war is going to help us
we're
by
not
any
even
means
making
to help
those
the
items.
economy.
I think that's the only thing
I don't
America
think we
has.
even make those items.
We only export weapons now. That's about all we got, right? They don't
Well-
take our cars. They don't like our cars.
Weapons may be our one big export.
That's
We
a big
export
export.
guns and planes and bombs and things that kill people.
Yeah.
And isn't that great?
Isn't that
No,
wonderful?
it's not great. It's a real sad commentary on what's happened to our economy. Plus,
There is students they're paying hundreds of dollars every month to pay their loans they took to be able to study. Why instead of spending money in these wars, you help these students forgive their loans or decrease the interest rate they pay. And there's a way to stimulate the economy. All this money that goes to the banks and to these companies that loan the money, they can go to the locally to the stores to people can buy more shoes, more clothes, more electronics.
The largest growing business is schools, and then the tuition rates are raised every year, and they're saying the reason we don't have
Medicine
factory
too,
jobs and whatnot is because people aren't. We need more educated people, and people will get jobs if they're more educated, and they're just selling you a product. Really, you could probably still be a secretary at a lawyer's office, and without having your paralegal degree, you could probably still figure it out pretty simply or quickly. But they're selling that idea that you will have a better job and more money, but they're starting you off in the hole with a loan.
one thing that I have seen over the years is that there's always this big emphasis on the sciences and engineering, and my understanding has come to be that the United States produces a lot of engineers, but American engineers trying to be employed within the United States don't get jobs, that they have to go outside of the United States to get jobs, that engineering is a field where if a company can bring in someone on a contract from India or from China, they will, and they'll be paid on an Indian or Chinese pay scale, and they'll get experience in all sorts of stuff that will help them in their career when they go back to China or India. But the American is SOL. Yeah.
They're stuck going
Should
out
have
of market
looked.
as well. They have to go find where they're going to get paid.
Yeah, and so all this stealing, a community, a political, economic community should be a place that is basically self-sufficient and on the margins trades. But we've ended up with an economy that trades in the very large degree in order to undercut its own population for the benefit of a small part of its own population. And that's become the model. And that's a model that hasn't existed stably in any country at any time. And I think Bernie's presidential campaign, a person who probably could have and should have won the election if it weren't for political corruption within the Democratic Party, shows you how far things have come. And that's the most surprising thing that has happened, is that a socialist, a self-avowed socialist, whatever that means, came close to being president of the United States. And I look forward to more of that in the future, because I think that's what we need. There's never been a country, naturally, where you should expect everyone to be a genius. Like, oh, you got to be a college graduate and have multiple degrees in order to get your SOL job, you know, of any sort. And that's the sort of environment that young people are facing.
Mark, but let me tell you something. Like,
Okay, what are you going to tell me?
when I went to college and I got my degree, my idea wasn't never like to make millions of dollars, you know.
Neither was mine, but I thought my country was going to
You
be
know,
okay.
and I think
not.
this is an idea that many people who go to college understand, don't you think?
Well, I think
I mean,
I think
there is people
people-
like in business, the business majors, like, of course they want to make a lot of money.
well,
But we know, like, as a journalist, as other disciplines, we won't make a lot of
when
money.
we started this show, I lived in a poor inner city neighborhood, and in that neighborhood, people didn't have much money, and some of them had jobs, and some didn't have jobs. But as time went on, less and less of them had jobs, and suddenly it all got gentrified, and my poor neighbors were gone. And the bankers went on TV and they said, well, that's what happens. We've decided this neighborhood's going to become, you know, gentrified. And I was like, whoa, he's actually saying that. And we showed a roll-in of that here on this show like 20 years ago. And, you know, that's happened over and over again in
Well,
Grand Rapids and across the
let me
country.
tell you something, Mark. Like, right now, they are trying to gentrify several neighborhoods here in
Oh, yeah,
Grand
yeah.
Rapids, more neighborhoods, like Boston Square,
Madison
Sure,
Square
sure.
and Boston Square.
Boston Square.
Yeah, I know where that is.
And other
South of my
neighborhood,
neighborhood, yeah.
Roosevelt Park, for example, and they are inviting people to give their opinion. I don't know how much they're going to take in consideration, but nobody shows up, man. Like, nobody shows up.
Well, you know, I wouldn't show up because
Why not?
I've had all sorts of experience in my life.
Why
where
not?
people- I'll tell you why.
Like,
Because
hold on, like,
All right.
there was another meeting. They invite the community, and the community shut down the meeting, man.
Well-
They shut down the meeting because they say, we don't agree with what
the
you're
reason
doing.
I won't go is that I've
So
seen,
this is what the media, we need to report. You know,
Well-
people don't agree with this gentrification.
I've gone.
And they are shutting down these meetings, and there's other
Sure.
meetings.
Well, I expect these meetings are, well, thank you for your input kind of meetings. And now we do what we want. Thank you. Bye. You know, and that's it.
No, but you can organize. You can organize the
Well,
neighborhood.
I encourage people to
You know,
organize.
like,
I think that people
it's
should
not
organize.
it's not just like, oh, do whatever you want. I don't want to know anything about what you do. You know, it's I'm here and this is what I want you to do with my neighborhood, and you should respect my will because I live in this neighborhood. And if you're not gonna respect my will, we're gonna do something about this.
Well, I think they don't. They purposely.
Tariffs. We
they,
need tariffs.
They purposely don't tell
More tariffs.
the public about these meetings. They're in newspapers, and nobody reads newspapers anymore. How do you? I mean, I think a lot of people that might be interested in going to some of these meetings don't even know that they exist.
I'm in Facebook. I've been invited to these meetings.
Oh, good.
I don't even belong to these neighborhoods, and I go to see what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And that's how come the other people don't know about these meetings if they are in Facebook and the social media, and why they don't show up and they say, well, you know, we don't like these ideas, and this is my neighborhood, and you're gonna respect my will because I live in this neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we can they can get help, they can get lawyers, they can get some organized and fight back. That's what.
And I think a lot of people feel small and unimportant, and they don't.
Why?
Think,
I
they
don't
don't realize.
understand.
Yeah, they
I
don't
mean-
realize a group is much better.
One of the reasons is, I don't know if you've seen that movie, Our Name is Crisis or not, with Sandra Bullock. It's a great lesson about the political process, because there's these presidential candidates down in Peru, and this guy's at the very bottom of the list, but he hires Sandra Bullock to come in and buff up his image. And so he renounces the IMF money. He talks all the students about getting relief on their loans. And eventually he creeps up and wins the election. And guess what happens? As soon as he gets to be the head honcho,
He's Mr. IMF.
he's Mr. IMF all over again.
Oh, absolutely.
See, that part of the reason Trump
Well, we can fight
is
back.
part of the reason Trump is president is because he's the best liar of the bunch.
Absolutely.
He told everybody everything that they wanted to hear, and there was all these dumb rummies out there that believed him. You know?
Absolutely.
And look what happened this week. He just gave away $1.5 trillion to his buddies.
His campaign
And we
manager-
still haven't seen his tax report, right?
His campaign
Yeah.
manager, Manafort.
How's
Trump's
he get
campaign-
away with that? Because they're all in bed together, right? It doesn't matter if they're Republican or
No.
it's the money.
It's all about money.
But if you get into David Icke and even beyond that, he says it goes beyond the money. It goes back to these Rothschilds and these houses of strength that come from the old aristocracy. And so that nothing has really changed. It's just the names have changed.
Well,
Sure.
it's because nobody. Well, no, the majority doesn't fight back. That's what-
And when did they ever fight back? Okay, let's take the
Yes,
French
they
Revolution.
do.
What about the French Revolution? Guess
Yes,
what?
They,
They-
yes, they do.
and guess what
There's political movements all over the world.
They killed indiscriminately. Robespierre, and when the mob took over, it wasn't any better than it was under the aristocracy. It was just different people being killed.
Conditions
wasn't it?
improve. Conditions improve.
I mean, look what
I think
happened.
it is true.
I mean,
that
look at now. France has one of the best
as awful as
health
Robespierre,
systems in the world.
as
Well,
awful as
England.
Robespierre was,
France, Germany, you know.
it did alleviate the suffering of the
course.
very poor to a significant degree. But of course, half of all the men ended up dying in Napoleon's wars after that period, and he was still claiming to be the revolution, which was absurd since he put on a crown and declared
But
himself the
there
emperor.
were changes, like in Mexico, the Mexican Revolution. After the thousands and thousands of people died in the Mexican Revolution, there was like some how do you say this? 8 hours. You just have to
8 hour
work
day?
8 hour day, a salary, minimum wage, benefits, health, hospitals. There was some change. It wasn't. It was people didn't just die in vain.
But now that's gone. It's gone even in the United States.
It's not totally gone, Mark. There are some services still. We have one of the best
After-
universities. One of the best universities in Mexico City is public. You
Well,
can go-
actually,
you can go and get education, one of the best education in the world, for free.
in the United States, you got to the point after Reagan where it was whoopee for the capitalists, and they were eliminating the 8-hour day. They were saying, yeah, let's have you guys sign this contract and work 12 or 18 hours a day. And I worked in those conditions. And this is progressively the sort of thing that is coming to the United States. Loss of environmental regulations, loss of labor protections, loss of benefits, loss of health care, on and on. And this has been, the U.S. does not rank well in terms of child mortality, child poverty, poverty in general. The U.S. is really falling fast, but our wealthy are doing fantastically well. And this is the trend that was going on when CTV started, and it's gone far beyond what I thought in my nightmares it would ever get to.
So what are we going to end up with? Re-engineering the human psyche so that we don't have these sort of driven people. We were thinking about this today. There's some guy out there that's made millions and millions of dollars because all he's done is work. That's all he knows. Just go out, fight the battle, and hopefully I'm victorious and I will make more
It's
money.
like Trump. All he knows is to steal and not pay people what he
Yeah,
owes them. and
they're
he
not
makes a lot of
sitting in the
money out of it.
monasteries wondering about what's the nature
Beat
of
them up,
reality.
whatever.
They know in their minds that reality is more, always more and better. That's what I want for me and my family and whoever they identify with. That's the reptile mentality. Now you come along and you get this mammalian where we're all part of the same tribe, like you do with nationalism. But I can tell you there's even a state beyond the mammalian mind, It's the neocortex mind, which is about we're all in it together. It doesn't matter what your nationality is. See, and I think that what we discover throughout time is that no matter how big the city-states expand into nation-states and expand into maybe hemispheric states, we might have this 1984 thing where we have 3 big hemispheric states at some point, and they're always 2 of them are always at war with a third one. I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of war. I mean, I used to think we could. I remember John Lennon, all he needs is love, and I believed it. I mean, I thought, that's why would we even have war? What kind of crazy fool wants war? But then you find out there's all these vested interests throughout time, these families. Look at back in the Second World War and the First World War, Ford sold munitions to both sides.
The Second World War, yeah.
Yeah, and the whole drug thing when the CIA is selling it for the Iran-Contra thing, that's something like that's still going on. We just haven't heard about it yet.
Well, the
Right.
Bushes were a big Nazi family here in the United States. They were big promoters of the Nazis. They sent $30 million to Adolf Hitler, said, "Great job, Hitler." The war happened, and their bank got seized by the U.S. government, but quietly, because Roosevelt didn't want to embarrass them, because the head of the family was a U.S. senator who also owned Union Bank of Hartford, Connecticut.
Well, I think one thing tells the story when 9/11 happened, all domestic flights were canceled, except for the bin Laden family that was allowed to fly back to
and
Saudi
the
Arabia.
Saudi royal family
Yeah.
members who were here in the United States as well.
So if they weren't a proxy hit group for a false flag attack, because all of our defenses were up north and the Canada, I mean, we went through it ad infinitum, didn't we?
Well, that's okay.
absurdum.
Here's another issue. When 9/11 happened, I saw it happening on TV, and I said, as soon as I saw it, I say, I reserve judgment. This could be a fake. It could be like the Maine blowing up in Havana Harbor. I know that this sort of thing has happened throughout history. Hitler had the Reichstag burned down and said, "Look,
It's a
it's a
commie."
retarded communist Jew, so we have to kill the Jews because of this, and the communists." So,
Why are we in a war of terror with people we never even met?
well,
They're just people that don't like us,
the
and we
thing
don't like
about
them.
that was, within 5 years, within 4 years actually, by 2005, we started doing shows here on CTV to bring it back to the historical perspective. And for the next 5 or 6 years, we were doing these 9/11 shows, or at least I was, and Stephen was, and you people participated. And what they were about was that there was so much inconsistency. For one thing, there was molten steel at the site months after the event had happened. There were people who took samples of that, and professors, a professor from Brigham Young University said, "Look, this is thermite and thermate. It's in here. That's why it's still molten. Look, it's still smoking. Why, months later, should it possibly be smoking?" There were so many things about it that were absurd. The way the thing came down, as if it was just things falling through the sky. There was nothing there anymore. It was as if there were no floors anymore. When the thing fell in Pennsylvania, there was no plane there. And over again, you kept on hearing the phrase, "The fireball was so intense that the fuselage disintegrated." What the hell? People turned off their minds. I think
People turn off their minds, Mark.
People
And guys,
turned off their minds because
people
people
like
around
us,
them turned off
we
their
turn
minds.
on our minds,
Everyone
and it's
around-
scary, right? You got to admit
people
it.
went
Well,
along.
There's a
I
whole
think
bunch of people out there want to do
the
us
most
harm.
scary thing was the fact they allowed these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
The wars were absurd. They were I think the idea was
Iraq. Why did
to
they
control
attack
the oil.
Iraq?
To control the oil. And they did not end up controlling anything.
They do. They control it.
Why?
They're
I
not
don't
Americans.
understand,
Oh, well,
These
what-
people on the top are not Americans. They're not Russians. They're not anything. They're citizens of this elite little cartel.
In one way, you can say that the war was a fantastic success for a class of people who owned oil stock. For those people, the price of oil going up in the United States made them absolute trillionaires. You know.
Sure.
The
Dick
Bushes,
Cheney,
people they knew.
Dick Cheney has dual citizenship between two countries.
When you go
United
from,
States and you know what else?
When you go from $1
Abu
a
Dhabi,
gallon
United
to
Arab
$5
Emirates.
a gallon, and it stays at $4 a gallon for 4 or 5 years, you're going to make a fantastic amount of money. And all those old oil wells around Grand Rapids started up again. You know, the ones that only go at a certain.
It's nothing
point.
different from the tulip bulb craze in Holland back in the 16th century, right? When one bulb was worth 50 guilders or something.
I have to say, people were very manipulated.
I mean, what's
on that
gold?
war.
Gold's up to 1,300. You know, gas was 25 cents a gallon when I was younger. Now it's $2.50 a gallon, which is 10 times the amount of. Gold went from $35 an ounce, and it should have gone up. It should be right now at $350 an ounce if it would have kept pace with oil and gas and everything else. But it's at $1,300 and some odd dollars an ounce now. Why? Because people don't have faith.
Well, it's not it's not a productive economy. It's a speculative economy. So people don't invest. If they can invest in just things going bad, they will. That was the whole credit default swap thing, where people were actually somehow investing in strange derivatives that if the overall economy started failing, they would make a lot of money.
Yeah.
That kind of idea is antisocial. And yet that became, the new way of making money. The economy and economists have become antisocial forces, I think. And they train people like Bobby in the colleges and universities to be their propagandists, to say, well, it's true that you can't expect anything, and you should be happy that you can serve coffee as a barista and maybe flip artisanal hamburgers on Wealthy Street or something, and that's a great thing.
So tell me, what's the difference between Trump and Mussolini? Did you happen to see over the weekend?
Mussolini apes Trump.
Did you happen to see that over the weekend that they had several psychiatrists that wrote this book about Trump? They do. I mean, these people are dead serious that he is mentally not there.
Oh yeah,
He's suffering from some sort of delusions of grandeur thing.
Narcissistic.
That is, they're in their minds, and this is what they say in the book, absolutely dangerous for this guy to be where he is right now.
Yeah, we could blow up. I mean,
he's ready to pull the trigger on half a dozen different places. You mark my words, there will be some kind of military conflict before the next election.
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
North Korea.
Well, that's one
it's
place.
the last refuge of a traitorous scoundrel to create war, so he can get reelected.
These guys, they don't have any shame, They don't. Now, I can't say that if Bernie would have won, which I voted for Bernie, but if Bernie would have won, there would have been this whole flood of other people coming in and trying to make you politically correct, which is equally odorous.
How so?
I like Bernie.
How so?
I like
How
Bernie.
how is it equally odious?
Because if you go to China, they're the most politically correct group of people on the face of the earth.
Chinese?
The Chinese, you look at them, they get in line. They line up. They don't make any fuss. They stand. I've got some, when I was there,
Yeah, but
I
they
got
still
these
like
books.
all of those lawn jockey cartoons.
They all
and
wear the
stuff.
same uniform. They all wear the same outfit. They're all controlled by some central committee that tells them how to react,
They're politically
what they're going to
correct
vote
within
for.
China. They do what's
Well, that's
correct.
you're politically correct within the group of power of the people in the country that you live in.
Yeah, but they're racist as hell.
But-
They're absolutely racist. All those horrible
That's what
cartoons about black people and Southern Hemisphere people, you find them all over China and Japan. All the ubangi lip.
You can't have fraternity without equally balancing it with liberty. See, if you get too much fraternity, which the Chinese have, where everybody shares the same bathroom, they don't even have stalls between the toilets. Everybody poops in the same open area. There is so much that you and I can't even, we wouldn't stomach for a minute. The way they tell you to get in line, what you're going to do, what you're going to do.
Yeah, but we don't.
What kind of job you're going to have.
We don't want that, but I actually see our political direction going in that direction because people are content to lose their power here in the U.S. I think average people are seeing their economy drip away and seeing their political power drip away, and they're caught up in these emotional, stupid side issues that just sap.
Well,
their
you saw what
power.
happened with Jack Nicholson.
Well, a lot of people is busy like working, Mark.
Well, of course, and
You
we're
know,
even
like,
busier than we used to be because
like-
that's part of it.
Yeah.
If you're too busy, you won't be able to develop your understanding.
Like look at the minimum wage is like less than $8 per hour.
Yeah,
I mean, what do you do with that money? It's just
I know.
insane. Like
WTF?
Like
you know, what's
the-
going on here?
the gasoline is 250, 268, 240 every day. You had to pay
Well,
$25 for a small car and
It was
$50 for a
almost.
big car.
It did get up to like $5 an hour.
Food-
$5 a gallon. You know.
Food is so expensive. People are so worried about how
I know.
to pay their bills.
I know, but
the rent.
I think that benefits the very wealthy. I think they're fine with people. I think the
Somehow I don't blame a lot of people for not getting involved in the political.
Well, when they can barely survive, I mean, that's the only thing on their mind is where they're going to get their food or rent money.
But doesn't that mean, Bobby, that that's what they? Okay, so if you have an evil elite, and I believe in an evil elite,
Correct.
They're sitting around going, well, that was really bad in the late '60s, the early '70s. We almost had a revolution, and they were questioning racism and imperialism and capitalism, and we can't have that. So we need them to not have this time to sit around expanding their consciousness and
Sure.
thinking about these things and
Agreed.
going to school. We need them to be worrying about food and having their relationships break up because of economic concerns and stuff. So
Sure.
we need them under stress, because when they're not under
absolutely.
stress, they come after us. And so I think that should be a political concern for people to realize that could be very well a part of what happened. I myself don't have any question about that.
Oh,
Well,
agreed,
Mark-
absolutely. I mean, there was small amounts of leisure in the 50s and 60s, and then, and then things started tapering off, and then, not enough money, and spouses had to go to, it would be a one-income household, and then it became a
Two
two-income
workers,
household.
essentially for the price of one, ultimately.
Correct. Yeah, and then it's been downhill from there. When they realized that people had, like you said, in the '60s, where they were trying for a revolution, they realized they had leisure, and so they took the leisure away
And the education,
tech-
essentially, by taking leisure away, I would say.
and then they're amusing us to death is one of my favorite terms.
Well, Mark, you saw that movie, The Circle, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, now, to me, that's the antithesis of the evil empire, is where you get these people that are so good that they won't even be able to lie anymore. Throughout, they're going to, what do? Devote themselves totally to transparency. And look what happens. The head guys have been lying and cheating and having people snuffed out along the way, and there's suddenly the young girl goes, "We're going to make your lives totally transparent." What's Tom Hanks say? We're screwed here, because for some reason, masses and masses of people have a hard time dealing with transparency. They want to be lied to. I mean, I may have an ideal that everybody wants to be told the truth, but in reality, I think that's what religions do, is they come in and they lie to you and make you feel good.
That's crazy, Asul.
And,
That's very.
they don't want the truth. The truth's a hard slog.
It's very. I think that's very hard on people, man. Like, if you tell them that.
I know, I'm hard on people. That's why I got the no bull.
In the world of the circle, people had some leisure time to devote to their circle thing, and yet they used it to totally trivialize their lives into strange, weird dead ends about, does she have false eyebrows?
Yeah,
Blah, and it was,
you didn't come to the party. How
was,
come you
what-
didn't come
what
to the
is
party?
this?
Everybody came to the party. Where were you? You didn't come.
yeah, it was an online party. What, you missed it?
See,
Yeah, this is part of the anesthesia in society that is preventing people from seeing that, for instance, things are politically and economically faltering, and also the environment is flying TFA, and it's like WTF, where the environment is.
But fortunately, there is some people who likes the truth, to know the truth, right?
Yes, well, we
Do you
like
agree?
to try to know the truth,
Yeah.
and I think that.
I like to know the truth about
Okay.
things,
Okay, what's the truth about the environment that people aren't paying attention to?
We are dying.
Yes, I saw something last night that I hadn't seen before because I went on the internet, looked up something I
I'm
hadn't
afraid now of drinking water because it's polluted, man.
Okay, 2 years ago, I realized that there were these vast, like more than football-sized craters that were blowing up in the Siberian Arctic. They're called pingos, which are these hills, but they
Pinguenos?
exploded and they became craters like 300 feet deep and 300 feet across. And what it was the tundra, for the first time in tens of thousands of years, has gotten so warm that frozen methane explodes. Boom! And it's doing it in the ocean depths too. It's going boom! And so from satellite, they can pick up how much methane is coming out of the Earth. And whole parts of the Arctic North are bright red. There's so much methane coming out. And methane is the most powerful greenhouse gas there is. Methane is like 30 times what carbon dioxide is. And they always used to say, oh my gosh, if the Arctic really gets warm, we're really SOL, at that point, because it's an uncontrollable chain reaction. So people are, doing their entertainment on the internet. People who have, some intelligence that should be devoted to looking out after their own long-term interests, and the environment is just flying apart. And if people would just look at what's happening, they'd realize that it's that important. And that has not, in 22 years, that has gotten so bad that it's the most shocking thing to me, how bad the environment has gotten, and that, what I was going to say, last night, you know how when a pipe is like shooting water out, in say a flood or something, and it's like, it's just a fountain coming out of a pipe. Well, the Arctic, at Greenland, at the glacier, at what they call the North Polar Ice Mass, which is really Greenland. It's like 2 miles high. Big lakes have formed on top of that ice in the summer. And it drills down, and as you go along the cliff face, that might be a mile high at the ocean, where this meets the ocean, there are these what look like water flowing out of huge pipes. And there are areas half the size of Manhattan that will collapse into the ocean. And that will happen several times in the summer. And you have glaciers that are now moving 8 miles a year that used to move, a mile in 10 years. And so everything they tell you about what the sea level is doing, the academics are controlled by the economists.
Mark, you don't have to go so far to explain the damage to the environment. Go to Radford. There was a factory.
The worst place to
Wolverine
see
factory,
this is in the Arctic, yeah.
Wolverine factory, and they dumped all these chemical waste on the land, and they polluted the water on the ground.
A mile away, people are
And people is
suffering from it.
drinking all this water, and they've had cancer.
Yes.
Here in Grand Rapids, just a few miles from Grand Rapids and Radford.
Yes.
I know where is that factory. I know where is that river. I know this area, and I know all these people suffering now cancer, and I don't know how many diseases because of that.
Well, to go full circle from where we began and the beginning of our show about losing jobs and whatnot, and that's a really big thing that companies will do also. There's we have environmental regulations here where if they build their factory in China or Mexico, the regulations aren't as strict. So they can build the product again even cheaper. Not only is the labor cheaper, but they don't have to pay the EPA or taxes on their carbon footprint, or even OSHA and safety regulations are all lessened and whatnot. So I mean, that's another thing. The environment's getting worse in those ways where we think we're smarter and we're building, trying to be green about things, but when they ship the factories overseas, and then it's more pollution as well. Carbon footprint gets bigger and bigger.
So I'm not really clear what it is that we're advocating here. Are we advocating that we want to have a complete collapse of the capitalist system and restore it with a bunch of
sustainable development.
Okay.
Sustainable
Who's going to
development.
run this? Who's going to run the show? Committees?
We.
Or who's we?
We the people.
Yeah, well, we the people turns out to be individuals, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to run the show.
Well, it
Why?
has to be.
It
You
has
have
to
to.
be.
We need
People are
a
drawn
regime.
towards leaders.
We need the regime of regulation. Right now we
Look
have.
at-
Who
look at-
run this show?
Hey, look what
We
happened
the people.
in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's
We the
Nest
people.
with Jack Nicholson. He got a little out of line, so Nurse Cratchit had to come in and give him the lobotomy. Right? What do you think fluoride does to the human brain? It calms you down, makes you tranquil. That's what Prozac's made out of, is fluoride. Why do you think we got fluoride in Grand Rapids? Keep us from rioting. We had riots here back in '67. Now fluoride, everybody's kind of like mellowed out.
We had fluoride before the 60s anyway.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, fluoride's been around for a long time, but it's always been
Grand Rapids was the first
It was
city
the
in the
first
United
city.
States to do fluoride. That's why we had the giant tooth down on the river, but they took it down. We had a statue of a tooth, and they
Hey,
took it away.
fluoride is a poison, and we put it in our drink,
Correct.
right, to make our teeth
wow.
stronger, supposedly.
I feel very healthy.
You know the word pharma?
I don't know about you, but I feel very healthy and very.
You know what the word
Unless-
pharma
alert
comes from?
and-
Pharma comes from
Unless you wash it out,
Just-
your fluoride toothpaste will kill a layer of the cells in your mouth, and every time you brush your teeth, you can feel that happening. And you go, ooh, there's a slime. Ooh, it's my mouth. That happens.
in allopathy. They have a thing called healing through poison. That's where the word pharma came from. Pharmaceuticals. There's never been one psychiatric drug that ever helped your brain.
That's
everything-
homeopathy.
Everything that's ever gone to your brain that's come out of these pharmacies has been to poison some part of your brain. Like if you're a little anxious, they poison your frontal lobe. or whatever. It's
I
poison.
disagree with you, Azul.
And that's what people do. They poison
Because
themselves.
like there is people with mental illnesses like schizophrenia and paranoia. Trump must be taking some medication.
He should if he's
I mean,
not.
but I mean like severe cases of schizophrenia. These people need medication, otherwise.
Well, we're supposedly
they
normal
don't-
people that don't need that kind of medication, but we're getting it anyway. Because somebody came along, somebody from some group somewhere, probably some think tank for the rich people, and said, we can't have riots anymore. We got to calm the people out. We're going to chemtrail them. We're going to do some fluoride in their water. There's processed food. We're going to throw a little bit of antipsychotic
Oh,
medicine.
yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about something completely different here, and that is space science and technology. And we've had a whole group of shows after the 9/11 shows where Blue and I and Stephen Stephen reluctantly, but Blue and I especially had shows and discussed the nature of technology as perhaps being other than it really is, that is the nature of the actual state of technology different than we're shown. I really do believe that what I've learned after the internet was very accessible and there was a lot of material there is that we do live in what I call a massively falsified reality, a massively falsified world. In so many ways, our history is different, the actual state of technology is different, and the universities and colleges, the academic world, is there not for the truth, but to promote a certain version of the truth which is safe for the elites. And ever since I came to believe that that might be the case, I see it more and more to be the case. For instance,
You're like
there's
Martin
only
Luther.
one, for instance, we don't have much time, but history. In history, archaeological history, in the UP, the Keweenaw Peninsula, has mines, deep mines, and most of the copper in that peninsula was pulled out, it's believed, thousands of years ago. And you can go in those mines, and they were, who did them? And who made the mounds? And who are these 8-foot, 10-foot, 14-foot people that were coming out of
What are you talking
the
about,
mounds?
Mark?
I'm talking about American archaeology, and there were many New York Times articles. There have been the state of archaeology up to about 1920 was that there was this earlier
Well, Mark, I can
strange.
tell you
Listen, wait. I have to say this. There was this other civilization, and then after about 1920 or 1910, the Smithsonian Institute started saying, "What people? What giants?" And these mummies and these skeletons started disappearing. And you can't see them in the Smithsonian. And they disappeared from California, where the Wrigley guy had a whole amusement park where you could go out to the Channel Islands and see thousands of these mummies, these giants. Now they're gone. And it's as if it never existed. And I think our whole human reality is really, in a nutshell, contained within that. And I told Stephen Durst, look it up, red-haired mummies,
Yeah.
giants, 2 rows of teeth, and he said, oh, and he looked it up on the internet. Yes, the New York Times has hundreds of articles about this before 1910.
But you can go to the
Okay,
all
all right, briefly, very briefly, 15 seconds.
Teotihuacan in Mexico. When the Aztecs came to Mexico City, this city was abandoned. Nobody knows what happened to the people in this city. They say 10,000 years later, the Aztecs arrived.
The Olmec.
All right.
Is that
Might
the
not have been
Olmec?
10,000, it wasn't, well, however long it was, I do believe that if you look
If
into
you
it,
want to research something strange and out of the ordinary, go to Teotihuacan.
the longer I live, the more I find out that the world is much, much stranger than I ever imagined. And don't go to a professor, because the professor is paid by some capitalist to have some controllable version of reality that he's going to present that's safe to the capitalist.
Hasta luego, adiós,
Yeah.
CTV.
22 years and a half of CTV. June 1995 to December 2017. And I'm really surprised that GRTV and CTV is still going, I'll say that. That's been a big surprise to me.
The technology's disappearing for
Congratulations,
sure.
man.
Yes,
Congratulations.
but the audience, except for Pablo's audience, is like crashed. It's because Pablo has this great local show in Spanish,
Tiempo Latino.
which is part of CTV, which provides a very unique television experience for the audience. And our show, the overall show, has become just a drop in the ocean. But that's 22 and a half years of CTV.
Mark, is there anything about it from apes and aliens that you don't agree with?
Sometimes
Like what?
I would have to think about it.
I don't know. They seem,
Occasionally I've said, oh, come on.
they seem a lot closer to the truth than the official story.
Yeah, essentially, you know,
Something like extraordinary.